Hello, beautiful. I'm your host, Nicole Goff. Welcome to the Ecstatic Life Podcast, the podcast for women who want to live fully embodied, nervous system regulated, open-hearted, radiant, and alive. Here we explore the practices, modalities, and lived rhythms that return you to yourself, to your heart, to your body, your intuition, and your divine spark. This podcast is for women who are ready to awaken their inner creatrix, activate their inner manifester, and remember, an ecstatic life isn't a destination. It's the path we're walking together. Hello, beautiful, and welcome back to the Ecstatic Life Podcast. I am your host, Nicole Goff. If you have never been here before, welcome. I am so glad to have you. Today, I am going to be doing a solo cast talking about softening into your feminine energy in your business, particularly. This is something that I will confess I have actually struggled with recently, which is a little ironic because literally my entire platform is built on softening into your feminine energy. So I found it interesting to reflect when I was doing my own internal work that I had slipped back into some of the hustle culture when it came to my business. So backstory, a few years ago, I was pregnant with my 5th child and totally burnt out. I had been martyring and doing, giving to my community, to my family, running homeschool co-ops and a homestead as well. I'm actually wearing my homestead shirt today from my 3 sisters homestead. But I was constantly in overdrive, really. And my nervous system was fried. I had unresolved trauma. I was martyring myself, and when I got pregnant with my 5th child, I realized it was, a turning point. I was like, I can't keep doing this, unless I wanted to have a nervous breakdown. And so I really intentionally, during that pregnancy, cultivated this atmosphere of self-care, cultivated this energy of softening into my feminine, of receiving help, of knowing how to ask for the help and then to receive the help, and creating a support system, and just really softening and dropping into a way of living that I had not experienced before. I had very much been in the masculine drive, you have to push to get things done. And also I would say this was a trauma response in this feeling that I needed to hold it all up, very much having the masculine container around my life, around my family, around all of our experiences, very much holding up the structure for everything that happened. And with that came a lot of responsibility. And because of all the responsibility that I took on, I felt like the weight of everything landed on my shoulders. And this was putting a huge strain on my marriage, of course, because I was martyring myself and because I was taking on all that responsibility and basically saying that I was the only one that could do it correctly, which again, a trauma response. I didn't trust other people to hold any of that weight. So this was putting a strain on my marriage because I felt like my husband was just another child in the house that I had to micromanage. That was the story that, I was telling myself. And there was a ton of resentment. And a few years ago, I was, on the verge of divorce. It was not a happy situation for me, but through some really good coaching, through some really good embodiment practices, nervous system healing, somatic work, I really took a deep dive in my self-care. I really cultivated my feminine energy and softened and learned to receive, and my entire life changed. In fact, my entire life changed so dramatically, so quickly, that I was super inspired to help other women with this same transformation. And I created a business out of it. I created a coaching business. I also created a blog and a podcast and newsletter and social media presence and, all of these things. And there was so much excitement behind all of that. I really dove headfirst into it. And I took coaching courses. I took a big intensive business coaching course and, followed all of these coaches' advices about how to market and the structure. And then about fall of last year, I started feeling the same similar twinge of burnout that I knew so well from years before. And I had to step back and go, whoa, what's going on? Right? Here I am, coaching women on softening into their feminine and, the power of doing less, the power of letting go of the hustle culture, of dropping the go, 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 do mentality and softening into your soft feminine powers to have more. And yet I was bringing that masculine energy into my business in a way that was starting to feel unsatisfying. So I had to take a breath, I had to take a pause and evaluate, where I was in this, how I was showing up, and what all of that meant. And in doing so, I got back in touch with my original plan, my original action steps for my life and for my marriage and for my mothering. And I started seeing how I could implement that in my business. So before I get into any of those strategies, let's define what I mean when I talk about softening into my feminine. So I touched on this already. Knowing how to ask for and receive help is a big part of that. Where I believe it started for me was actually first in creating boundaries. And now that might seem counterintuitive, right? Because boundaries seem like a masculine structure, but the feminine flows within the structure. If you think of the masculine energy as the riverbanks and the feminine energy as the water, the river flowing through it. So first, we need some solid boundaries around our needs. And I know for me personally, and for all of the women I work with pretty much, boundaries are a big issue. We are entrained in our culture to overgive. We are entrained to martyr. We are entrained to say yes, even if we really have a no inside of us. So setting good boundaries. And when you're talking about your business, that can also be boundaries around your time, around your energy. And, if your boss is asking you to do tasks that don't fall under your category of work or outside of your scope, or work extra hours that you don't want to work because that cuts into your time with your family, these kinds of things. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business owner, that means how you actually schedule your time and separate work and home life, how much extra time you give your clients, et cetera, et cetera. So boundaries are very important in that. And then I spoke on nervous system healing. So for me, and the basis of my work with women, I like to always start with the nervous system first. Because if you are coming in with an unregulated nervous system, if you're constantly in fight, flight, freeze, fawn, then you're not only not going to feel good in your body, because when you're not regulated, there's a whole cascade of health problems, issues, hormonal issues, gut health issues, on and on and on and on and on that can happen from, constantly having cortisol dumping into your body, constantly, living in this activated sympathetic nervous system state. But you're also not going to be able to show up in your life and in your business in a present way. So I always start with the nervous system, and I have a lot of tools that I go to for regulating the nervous system. But basically what that means is not living in the activated sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all the time or most of the time. And if you do get there, quickly being able to regulate yourself back down into your baseline calm state. And unfortunately, the environment around us is very activating. Just think about cell phones, like they're constantly dinging at us, and while this might seem like something small and trivial, it just adds on to this feeling that we're always on, right? It's always pinging for your attention. And if you're a mom, which most of my audience is, so if you're a mom, it's like, we're being tugged at from all these different directions by our kids all day, by our jobs. And we've got these cell phones, these devices that we are so attached to that are always pinging for our attention, distracting us. And those noises actually do send us into a slight state of arousal every time. So also, just the world in general, very busy, very, very on the move, on the go, all the time. Hustle culture is all around us. So it's really important to be able to slow down and to soften and to regulate. When I say soften, again, when we're talking about the feminine energy, right? So what does it mean to soften? If you think about the masculine energy as being linear and straightforward and piercing, penetrating, the feminine energy is softening, opening, receiving, allowing. And so practices that can really help with allowing that softening to happen are embodiment practices. I think that the best one that comes up for me and that I teach really is dance. Dance is such a powerful tool to get you back into your body and into your feminine energy. When we're talking about softening into our feminine energy, this is really about coming back into the body. Because when you think about when we're in the hustle, when we're in the do mentality, we are a lot in the head. So we're operating out of the head. And so a lot of this is coming back down into the body and into the heart and operating from feeling and intuition and not so much from our logical minds. So what softening into your feminine energy is not about passivity or laziness or lethargy. This isn't about procrastination would be another one. This isn't when I talk about doing less to have more. This isn't about delaying the inevitable or stalling or, getting in freeze, because those are freeze responses, which if you're talking about regulating your nervous system, once your nervous system is regulated, you should not be living in that freeze response. But things like procrastination, for example, are a freeze response. When we feel powerless and unable to handle what's happening and unable to act in the world. So softening into our feminine energy is not about not taking action ever. And it's not about allowing chaos to, just rule and having no direction. But really, when we are more in that mode of control, more in that masculine energy, we have a tight grip. We have a tight grip on, how we want things to go, how we want our reality to be. So there is a loosening of that grip and allowing and a trusting that has to occur. So what this might look like when it comes to your work, your job, or your business. When your body feels unsafe, you will push. When you push, you override your intuition. When you override your intuition, your strategy starts to get brittle. So pausing, intentionally pausing, let's say before posting, doing some breath work before going on a client call, regulating before you have a big sale to make, intuitive movement before talking to a new potential partner. These kinds of nervous system regulation and embodiment tools can really help you to show up as your best self. Not just being in the feminine flow, but really to show up as your highest, best self in your business. Another way that this shows up in your business, when you soften into your feminine energy, you shift out of forcing, like I said, that control, that push, you shift out of forcing and into magnetizing. So from the masculine energy, the overdrive, this might look like cold DMing people all day, or pushing to hit a number, launching from a place of scarcity and fear. If you have a boss, if you're working a job, the working late, the working overtime, the pushing for the company. Whereas when you're softening into your feminine energy in your business, the feminine leadership can look like embodied storytelling in your social media, relationships over reach, warm outreach, spacious launches, following your pleasure in your business, really doing what lights you up and not doing things out of obligation or because you think that's the thing you have to do to move the needle. And there's this practice that I have just been dabbling into recently, which is called pleasure mapping. And this is about really diving into how things feel in your business and really finding them in your body and in your psyche. And what do the aspects of your business feel like? And really like following those things that feel expansive, those things that feel pleasurable. And also in mapping where you feel constriction. So where you are operating from pressure rather than from desire. And you can really, I invite you to audit your offers, your schedule, your marketing, your pricing, your hours, every aspect of your work and really see, how does it feel in my body? Another way that I have recently been learning to soften is by tracking my menstrual cycle and tracking the phases of the moon and honoring myself as a cyclical being for my productivity. So I have been marking down which phase of my cycle I'm in, and each week I am concentrating on what the needs for that particular phase are. So for the follicular phase, that's initiation and ideation. So, I might be mapping out content or outlining offers. And during ovulation, that's when you're most magnetic. And so that's really a time to batch record my podcasts or my content. And the luteal phase, that's like, your fall period, that would be more for like refinement or editing. And then during the menstrual phase, that's a good time for evaluation, for visioning. You need more rest. You let ideas come to you. There's not so much striving energy. And so when I have taken this framework and applied it to my life and to my business, it has made things make so much more sense. And maybe you'll resonate with this. Like maybe there's times where you're just like, oh my gosh, like, why can't I, muster the energy to do the things that I'm supposed to do this week? Well, maybe it's because this week, what you are aligned with is needing more rest. And the super interesting thing about this aspect is that you don't have to be cycling for these energies to affect you. You are still a cyclical being as a woman, even if you are postmenopausal or in lactation amenorrhea, you've had a hysterectomy. So the thing is you still have a cyclical nature and can still track it by the cycles of the moon. So this is super, super cool technology that I have been really just eating up, information about. And I actually have created a free workshop on this. I will link in the show notes, and it's going to be a 2-hour workshop on cycle tracking for productivity. I've got some really great printouts that can help you get started for tracking your cycle if you're interested. Again, I'll link that in the show notes. But so if you are finding yourself in this energy of hustle, in this masculine energy in your work, what are some actionable steps? Some actionable steps that you can take right now to begin to soften. Well, first off, awareness is number one. Awareness is the key. So maybe you never even thought of things in this way, or maybe not in this context, as I surprised myself by finding myself in this, masculine energy where I thought I had done all this work to cultivate my feminine flow. But some actionable steps that you can take right now. One would be to regulate before you create. And this can apply to pretty much any kind of business, whether you're a creative, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're, working a 9 to 5, any time that you're sitting down to create anything, to do your work, regulate first. And this can be breath work. This can be, putting on a little music and dancing for 5 minutes. This could be a little yoga stretching. If you work in an office and there are a bunch of people around you and you don't want to, look too woo-woo, this might be limited to closing your eyes for a few minutes and just syncing with your breath, or getting up and taking a walk around the block. Some way that you can regulate your nervous system. Even stepping outside, getting sunshine on your skin and actually looking at the sun regulates your nervous system. You only need a couple of minutes of being in the sunshine to begin to regulate. There are lots of different regulation tools, and most of them live right in your body. They don't require anything. I do have on my YouTube channel some free exercises. You can go over there and check them out. Some embodiment, movement, breath work, meditations, different things that you can access for free over on my YouTube channel. And you might need to try out a few different ones to find out what really fits for you, what really feels good. Another way that you can soften into your feminine energy in your business right now today is to start tracking your cycle. So if you're not doing this already, there are apps that you can get, but honestly, I just use my day planner and, I mark down the first day of my period and I go from there. Again, I've got a free workshop coming up all about this, so join my workshop if you want to learn more. Another thing that you can do right now is to embrace doing less to have more. So create white space in your schedule. Create space for expansion, for nothingness, for whatever you want, for reading a book. So by intentionally creating open space, you can fill it with something that you love. And that is so at the core of my teachings, embracing the self-care, to take up that time with something that is just for you. And this is something that really lights you up and feels so good to you. And, this can look like traditional self-care, like bubble bath. It'll be a walk in the park, but create that openness, create that space for you and your wants and your needs in your schedule. And it's amazing. It seems like counterintuitive maybe, but when you create the space for whatever you want, you magically actually have more time and more productivity during those work hours that you set for yourself. And there is a whole science behind that I don't have time to go into in this podcast. But you can literally bend your time by opening yourself up to the things that you love and to the things that light you up. And if you want to go deeper on that, on this concept of doing less to have more, on this concept of softening into your feminine energy, especially in your business, cycle tracking, everything I've talked about today, I am going to be launching a 3-month business coaching container. And this is not I am the guru expert telling you, from my higher place of greatest knowledge. This is actually a do it with me workshop. And so you will be learning right along with me because, as I said, it's really only been the last few months that I have really intentionally been using these tried and true practices that I have been touting for years now in context of my work. So if you want to come on that journey with me, Pleasure-Led Business is the name of that container, and it will be starting this spring. So I will link more information about that. It will be happening right after my free cycle tracking for productivity workshop. So you can head over to my website and sign up for those. I would love to see you inside, and I would love to work with you as we learn just how juicy and pleasure-filled and soft and relaxing business can be, and fun, of course, too, because that's what it's about, right? That's what it's about, having fun.